Welcome to the Everybody's Crushing It podcast. Never before has there been a time of more change, more opportunity than right now. Trillion-dollar companies, trillion-dollar industries born overnight. Investors empowered with technology and information like never before. Markets around the world and across the spectrum relentlessly charging to all-time highs. Let's look at the people, the companies, and the industries at the forefront of this revolution to learn how they're crushing it and, importantly, how they're using their resources to give back. Here's your host, Douglas Blake.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Everybody's Crushing It. I'm your host, Douglas Blake. Today's episode is going to focus on FinTech, and we have with us Mat Dellorso, who is the founder of WealthForge and the often mispronounced Altigo, which stands for Alternative Investments in Good Order. Mat, welcome to the show.
Hey, Doug. Thank you for having me.
So first question right off the bat, is it Altigo or Altigo?
Well, Doug, I like the way you say it, to be honest, but I think we hear it in our head as Altigo. You know, Altigo is an acronym. It stands for Alternative Investments in Good Order. But I think you bring like a sultry, English or Spanish accent to it. So either way works for me.
I'll take that as a compliment. And for the purpose of this episode, we'll call it Altigo, but it's finding its way into the lexicon. And, they say the height of a product being identified with an application is Kleenex, where it's no longer a tissue, pass me a Kleenex. And Altigo is finding its way into the lexicon for alternative investment processing because it's doing something that this industry has sorely needed for many years. And it's kind of bringing this asset class into the 21st century. So what is it that Altigo does? And why is that application so important in today's financial services industry?
Yeah, Doug, I'd love it for Altigo to be synonymous with a verb like a tweet as to Twitter. That would be amazing. I don't think we're there yet, but certainly appreciate your spotlight here in this podcast and certainly your firm using the platform. So Altigo is a alternative investment, subscription automation, and straight-through processing platform. The problem with alternative investments is they're very opaque. They're kind of private by definition. But they're always done, or historically they've been done through paper and check, sort of check and application, the way all kind of financial services transactions were done 20, 30 years ago. But today you can buy, mortgage, you can open a bank account, you can take out life insurance, you can certainly purchase a stock or bond all at the click of a button. And so our vision for Altigo is to make owning an alternative investment as easy to own as a mutual fund. So any financial advisor, any investor can add alternative investments which provide higher yield, potentially greater diversification to their portfolio, being able to do that at the click of a button, not having to run through 70 pages of legalese and figure out where to sign or initial and mail a check or institute a wire, but actually having that all done through infrastructure behind the scenes, like it's been done for purchasing stocks, bonds, ETFs, mutual funds. We're bringing that same sort of transaction online technology to alternative investments through Altigo.
Excellent. And one thing that I'd like to just kind of clarify here is alternative investments. Why are they so important to integrate into financial services, into model portfolios, or into client accounts for diversification? They were only about 6% of the global market about 15 years ago. Now they're reaching 12%, likely to grow to 18 to 24% of all assets are going to be considered alternative investments by 2025. And obviously the numbers are massive. We're talking about $15 trillion right now, going up to about 20. What's an alternative investment? Why are they important? And why is it so cumbersome for us to integrate them into your prototypical wealth management strategy?
Yeah, so we define an alternative investment, Doug, as anything that's not traded on a public stock exchange. So it's a private investment. It's usually real estate, private equity, private credit, hedge fund, venture capital. It's something that you can't buy, on a listed exchange. Obviously, alternative investments can provide diversification because they're not typically correlated to public indexes and public stock markets. I'll give you a kind of the founding story of WealthForge. Actually, WealthForge is the parent company that I founded that came out with the Altigo platform. We founded the company in 2009, and we actually founded it because my co-founder's father had existing cash flow. He had a very successful business that was producing a bunch of income during the last Great Recession, and he didn't want to put that that cash flow into the already high and going down public stock market and anything correlated with it. So he had to have a flight to safer assets or non-correlated assets, and those were alternative investments for him. So he had me and my co-founder find him alternative investments in real estate and in private companies and in technology that could diversify his portfolio but still outpace inflation and bring him a good yield even in a time of a recession. So alternative investments we think are probably anywhere between, like you said, 5 to 10% at most of a high net worth investor's portfolio today. Because of diversification, the chance for greater yield, tax benefits, there's a whole bunch of reasons. We think potentially the optimal, and we debate this all the time, should be somewhere between 10 to 20% of a client's portfolio that's high net worth and can withstand the risks and illiquidity. But in order to make that growth jump from 6% today, you said, Doug, to 20% potentially ideally, we're gonna have to make this business so much easier to do. We're gonna have so much better education for advisors and investors. And we think Altigo, the technology, kind of the infrastructure behind that, making that easy is certainly one piece of that puzzle.
Absolutely. And as they say, necessity is the mother of all invention. And you guys are fighting the good fight. And there's a few other companies I know that are working on this. What needs to be improved in this space, at least from the detractors, would be there's a lack of transparency around this asset class, and there's a lack of liquidity. And so I think that the functionality of a platform like Altigo greatly enhances the transparency. And obviously that's something that will be improved upon in the years to come industry-wide, but probably also through the services that you offer. But what about liquidity? One of the things that's tricky with alternative investments is they're non-correlated assets. They're not supposed to be mainstream like your stock and bond portfolio. They're supposed to be different so that they can truly diversify you. But that brings about the challenge of liquidity. Do you have any thoughts on that? And maybe any insight into where that problem might be solved down the road?
Yeah, there's certainly groups and asset managers that are coming out with more liquid alternative strategies. I mean, liquid alts are something that are, obviously, coming out because people want a shorter investment time horizon. We do some stuff that isn't your typical 7 to 10 year hold, like traditional private equity, private companies, maybe even real estate might be. But we do some stuff that's one example is litigation finance. Litigation claims in the United States have an average time period of about 1.5 years to come to either judgment or settlement. And so we do alternative investments in that one particular asset class that's pretty interesting, completely uncorrelated, has a shorter, on average, hold period. So you can definitely find assets that have just by nature, have a shorter time horizon. And then you can also do things around structure to bring more liquid kind of types of securities and investments into an alternative investment product. So certainly there's secondary transactions. We both, Doug, you and I both work with a company that's doing secondary shares in private companies. So that obviously brings liquidity to existing shareholders that might need it to finance, purchasing of a new house, having a kid, divorce, life event. So there's certainly ways you can get liquidity in alternative investments, either through structure or the investment themselves.
Awesome. To paraphrase my namesake, Frederick Douglass, there can be no progress without struggle. What are some of the challenges that you and I, but let's stick with you. Don't talk about me. That you've had in getting the math and getting the mechanics right with the Altigo platform, and what opportunities do you think those challenges are going to create in the future?
Yeah, we've been at this business. I founded WealthForge over 10 years ago, so we've been at it for a while, and we've certainly struggled, along the way to get to where we are now. But certainly with alternative investments and our platform, first and foremost, it really just starts with the user experience of an advisor. So we want to make sure that advisors have a great user experience subscribing their clients to an alternative investment. But really, for us to start that, we need to have offerings, alternative investments on the shelf for them to subscribe to. So we have to set up, right now on the Altigo platform, there's over 200 different alternative investment funds. We have to go through those complex legal documents, make sure that every term, every line item, every fill in the blank is perfectly described and entered correctly, not only through our technology, but also inputted by the advisor. So we've done some things like integrate CRM data and pull data sources and map the documents through DocuSign and build some proprietary technology to kind of solve that operational, just fill in the blank, have the advisor understand what they're, entering, and have the client have a great, user experience of just signing as an investor. So there's tons of just issues in kind of the offering set up mechanically in Altigo. And then with alternative investments in general, I mean, they are, opaque, and reporting and performance is very, very difficult. Having custodians hold them, your favorite custodian, your big custodian, hold those assets. They don't like to do that. It's risky, it's illiquid, it gives them problems operationally too. So getting the custodians to play along, and then integrating it with the firm and the firm's process. So if the advisor is part of a supervisory structure at a branch or at a brokerage, making sure they're trained on the product, they're educated, they have the ability and the roles and permissions to be able to sell that product, to make sure that it goes through their compliance and supervisory workflow, do their principal to review the trade, make sure that the investor is suitable and knows the risks and understands what they're getting into, and then actually sending the data on to where it needs to go, to the fund manager or to the transfer agent or to the fund admin for reporting and tax and all the good stuff of once they're actually in the position. So there's so many pieces of the process, individual, operational points, areas for errors, areas for breakdowns and transparency, and having a system, a computerized, rules-based, audited system like Altigo helps solve for a lot of those manual, error-prone, lack of transparency items where you can bring clarity.
And I have to say, that's a laundry list of challenges, but you guys have done an incredible job with a little bit of anecdotal support. We started with this as a novel idea. Hey, let's see if we can lessen the operational and compliance burden of this workflow by automating part of the process. And maybe this becomes a selling point to working with us, that we have an easier system. And it's so good, it's so intuitive, and it's so efficient that we were able to ramp up. I won't go into specifics, but I would say we've quintupled our production year over year in alternatives. And a lot of our reps actually lean on Reg Ds versus other types of alternative investments, because they know that they're loaded up on your portal and that they're more easy to transact than those that we have through the old paper documents and DocuSign workflows that we've created on other programs that aren't on the platform. So you've done an incredible job. You've become indispensable to us and sort of the ace up our sleeve when we're competing with other firms out there. So it was not all for naught in our case, and I'm very excited to see where this is going. If I could look around the corner with you here for a minute, I had a discussion today, in fact, with the CEO of a managing broker dealer about what you're doing there in terms of integrating with other technology partners and actually really ingraining this into the fabric of the infrastructure of a BD and RIA and even the financial services industry. And humor me to sort of to walk us to a certain point, and then I'll hand it off to you to tell me if I'm onto something here. So you've got Altigo, now you've got Altigo, and you've got our workflow, we got our procedures, everything integrated there. Then you bring in a partner. Am I free to share the names of some of the partners that you're working with?
Yeah, sure, Doug. We've got a lot of things in the works. Some are done, some are in concept. But
I'll
sure.
only speak about the ones that are done. So we've got Redtail integration now, and that's incredible. And this is not a commercial for Redtail; they're not paying me for this. You've got that integration that makes life easier, but that also takes us a step further down that road of really integrating this obscure asset class into the mainstream. You've got integration with AI Insight for continuing education. That helps us with compliance. That helps us and our reps with due diligence and having access to information about these products. Now we're solving for transparency a little bit. And if we walk down the road reporting is something that's lacking with alternative investments. There are many different custodians. There are many different broker dealers that accept or don't accept these types of investments on their platform, or they'll hold them or they won't. And that's become so challenging. So what we're looking for in the industry is a comprehensive mechanism for reporting these investments to clients alongside their other investments in stocks, bonds, mutual funds. And if we can get there, it's going to help us out greatly. But like I said, looking around the corner, might that not be a step towards creating a secondary market for these? If we can get all of the reporting and all the information in one place and bring about that last domino to fall, liquidity. Is that something that's possibly on the horizon, or what's your thought on that?
Yeah, for sure, Doug. I appreciate the kind words of what we've been able to achieve together. We appreciate your partnership, and we've helped obviously shape the Altigo platform to be what broker dealer and advisor firms need. From feedback like from your firm. We do have a lot of other integrations planned. I mean, to your point, you'll want to make Altigo integrated in the workstation and the everyday FinTech and WealthTech tools that this industry uses. So yeah, Redtail and AI Insights are a very first stop or very first step. As mentioned, we do have custodian forms and paperwork, and we are working to send data automatically to the custodians to make them more efficient and allow these assets to be held at your favorite and popular custodians. And then we've done integrations with transfer agents and fund admins to obviously help out the sponsors and the reporting of the actual positions and client onboarding. And then we're actually sending data back to Salesforce and other CRMs to have position information at the sponsor as well. And yeah, I certainly think that with additional kind of tax reporting performance information, we'd love to integrate with Orion, InvestNet, SS&C, Black Diamond, and we're working on many of those things so that the alts position shows up in one screen inside the portfolio as it should be, rather than having it held off book or not in the portfolio management system or entered manually below the line. So yeah, once you have that snapshot of how things are performing, because we've done the transaction through the technology to get the data in there in the first place, and if those positions are updating because new information is disseminated through the technology as well, and you can see your whole portfolio and where things need to be balanced or where things need to be reinvested or divested, you can start doing some of those secondary type of transactions. You can have a bid, or you can have an ask, or you can have a marketplace that allows folks to buy private securities from one another if there is that need and demand for liquidity. So with that infrastructure, you can certainly build the marketplace, and Altigo is a marketplace platform. So we are working toward that through these integrations and through partnerships with your firm and others.
Right, and since the topic of today's episode is FinTech, that kind of brings us to the next forum for this type of technology and this type of integration and where it brings the asset in the big picture. We look at things like SoFi and Robinhood and even social media, obviously Wall Street Bets being a great example on Reddit. The decentralization and the democratization of financial services, of financial advice, for better or worse, and for access to financial service tools and applications. And this is without even getting into crypto and that whole universe. I'll save that for another episode. Where do you think this is all going? What does financial services look like in 3 years, 5 years? Alternative investments, because they really have to be explained to the client properly. The client has to be sophisticated in most cases and accredited to understand how to invest in them and what the ramifications of that might be. Is there a place in that future world for alternative investments where everything might be run from a smartphone or a social media account? And how do you see the industry morphing as FinTech becomes more and more prominent?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think there's a world for alternative investments on a smartphone and at the click of a button. I think, Mark Andreessen said it really, really well. Software is eating the world. And I'd say over the past kind of 10 years, and certainly right now, FinTech is super, super hot, heavy on the tech part there. I think the financial industry, although it's been, technology revolutionized ever since, the introduction of the microchip, finance is a little bit slower because of the oversight and regulation. And so I think, it was just crazy to me when we founded WealthForge that alternative investments hadn't been electronified. There were securities rules on the books from 1933 and 1934 that our teachers in school, when we came up with the company, cautioned us against breaking because those hadn't been updated, to even consider what the heck a computer is or the internet. So, there are so many platforms out there. There's crowdfunding platforms. There's platforms like Rally where you can invest in collectible baseball cards or Pokemon cards, which is a type of alternative investment. It's not traded on a public stock exchange. It's in some ways non-correlated at the click of a button on a smartphone. So I think alts are going mainstream, to steal the name of another podcast by another colleague in the industry. And I absolutely think it's going to come more and more to the advisor, more and more to the retail investor. And really, if crypto is a guide, kind of anything can be potentially tokenized, and anything with supply and demand and of value, can be invested in. And that's all possible through the scale of technology. So, like I said, I think alternative investments should be somewhere between 5 to 20% of a high net worth person's portfolio if they can withstand the risk and potentially liquidity problems are solved. But obviously, that's a consideration. And in order to get it there, there's going to need to be many, many avenues, many, many marketplaces, a ton of accessibility. I think I spend half of my day on my smartphone, so that's a good place for it to start. And then certainly on the computer. So if I fast forward, 3 to 5 years, I think we do see alternative investments going more and more mainstream. The types of alternative investments, not just real estate, not just energy potentially, but everything, can be, that has demand and supply to be, made into an investment that's not necessarily traded on a public traditional stock exchange. And I think those things can be super accessible to the everyday investor and the sophisticated advisor. So I think this space, even though it's been hot and growing for the past 10 years and really hot over the past 2 years, I don't see it slowing down. I don't think regulation will squash it. I think people will figure out smart ways to protect consumers and protect the individuals that need to be protected, and do it in a legal format and framework. So I think we're probably in like the 4th or 5th inning, and I think this ball game's got a lot more to go.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And even in mainstream investing, 10 years ago, alternative investments as they applied to the financial services industry usually just meant things like non-traded REITs, oil and gas participation programs, things like that were, kind of, even though it's an alternative investment, they're so similar. It's almost like just another asset class with similar attributes that doesn't really non-correlate a portfolio, and it doesn't really diversify a portfolio in as much as it could. But today, an alternative investment might be a Pokemon card, or a sneaker collection, or cryptocurrency, or NFTs, something I'm still struggling to get my head around. But it's an exciting concept that today's investors, and certainly tomorrow's investors, are embracing alternative investments. And it's going to be a whole host of challenges for you to overcome in the future. But, as they say, every challenge is also an opportunity. Sky's the limit for what you guys can do in the future, because you've got a head start in figuring out how to take something from over there and bring it in and put it over here. So I'm excited to see how that all turns out, and I'm a part of the journey with you, and really excited to see how this technology is going to grow in the next couple of years. But to digress just a little bit, you said that Mark Andreessen once famously said software is eating the world. It's not eating the entire world, because I ate a good amount of the world during the pandemic all by myself. And one of the things that we've discussed in the past was your affinity for, I believe you've got a big green egg, if I'm not mistaken.
I do. Yeah. Doug, I think you told me, with the pandemic, you had time to be able to babysit and smoke, meat for several hours. And that was true. My father-in-law got me into the big green egg. He's had one for several years at his house, and we've just enjoyed, smoking and making chicken and pork and steak and brisket and even pizza. Basically everything we can find, probably tastes better over an open flame and some hardwood coals. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time over the pandemic. I say life's too short for cheap wine and poorly cooked food. So I do enjoy getting out in the backyard and using my big green egg. And I think the pandemic was probably a boon to the butcher and grill industry and my other favorite hobby, the golf industry. So
Right.
those are our private pursuits that we like to do when we're not crushing the world of business together.
Absolutely. And I'll say with respect to smoking or cooking on an open flame, I can't quite tell. There's an old saying that every chef can't bake and every baker can't cook. That it's kind of like there's a left brain thing going on with bakers where everything is very specific, and a right brain thing going on with chefs where it's a lot more creative and it's taste, touch, palate. And I don't know where smoking, barbecuing, or grilling over an open flame, or cooking over an open flame, I don't know where that fits. I don't know if you have a take on this, but I'm very much a right brain. I'm very much a creative person, and so I like to think I'm a pretty good chef, a terrible baker. My wife is the opposite. I do have trouble with the rules of smoking sometimes, and the patience that's required, and I'm starting to think it's more of a baker's endeavor than a chef's endeavor. I don't know if you have a take on that.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm definitely more like you, creative, and I usually don't measure a ton of things. I do it to taste. And yeah, I mean, even with smoking, I do use a meat thermometer a lot of the time, but it usually doesn't take me exactly, the length of smoking it says in the book. So I think it's a combination. I mean, I would say a lot of the barbecuers that I know, sprinkle and rub seasoning on till they're content. There's no right amount, but then certainly the recipe of the ingredients in the rub, they might want to get pretty precise. So I don't, that's a great question. It might be a little bit of both, but I'm definitely more right brain as well.
Yeah, I think maybe I'm asking for some guidance because it's hit or miss with me sometimes. And the anxiety that goes along with it is really sort of getting to me lately. If you're doing a brisket, you're talking about 12, 13 hours at 250 degrees. And I have a Traeger. I've made that clear. If I'm not allowed to use the brand name and they have to edit it out, I have a wood pellet fired cooking.
I think we said big green egg too, so it's all good.
Yeah, and you've got a ceramic, oval shaped cooking device, and the anxiety in it not coming out well after all of that time and effort, it gets to me. I'm kind of stressed out those last couple of hours, and if there's a stall where the temperature stops moving for a while. So I'm trying to figure out, is that because I'm more of a chef and I don't follow the rules, or is that just the nuances of grilling and smoking meats, which I suspect it's the latter.
I think, I think you're a grilling extraordinaire. It's a labor of love, Doug. The amount of care and preparation and time you spend on it, usually the better it tastes. And I don't know if those things are correlated, for cause or just, happenstance. But
Sure.
Certainly some of my best cooks have not been when I had a bunch of people over and family over and having a good time and not exactly paying attention to the thermometer. So attention to detail, I think with meat and on a smoker, I think can help for sure.
Right. Well, this has turned into a bit of a therapy session for me, I think. And what I'll say is that Everybody's Crushing It is a title that I chose for this because when you go into the world of social media, it seems like everybody's crushing it. And part of that's probably because they choose to show you what they choose to show you. And you can only interpret their life, their industry, their career, their success based on what you see. We all know everybody's not crushing it, and I'm not crushing it with smoked meats, but it's a work in progress, and I'm getting there. I'm getting better, and I'm trying my very best, and I've had some real triumphs there. So in the world of people not crushing it, let's say people who maybe need help or need support, I know that there's a lot of matters out there that are near and dear to people's heart. Off the top of your head, are there any causes that you're passionate about, or any people that you'd like to help with your success and with your prosperity?
Sure. Yeah. I'd love to be more a philanthropist. And I think a little bit about, a legacy, but don't think about it enough. My wife is actually very caring. She a couple of years ago actually started a nonprofit based on a personal experience that she had The nonprofit was called A Small Comfort, and they either went into hospitals and redid, children's play places, or they provided better atmospheres for palliative care for children who, were terminal or had cancer or very, very sick. So that philanthropy actually kind of morphed into a larger philanthropy called Noah's Children, and that's a local group here in Richmond. That's part of the Bon Secours Hospital Network that, once again, just helps children who are sick or may have cancer or are really struggling, helps the families of those children too, because that's such a traumatic time and traumatic experience. And my family had a experience like that. So that's a charity, and that's a cause that's very near and dear to our heart, because nobody chooses, to have a sick child or bring a child into the world that's not, going to crush it. So that's one, Doug. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. And we certainly, we thank your wife for her effort in that. And it sounds like a really noble cause. I'll paraphrase this, but there's a sign in the office in George Bailey's bank, and It's a Wonderful Life, if you look closely, and it says, we only truly own that which we give away. And in the spirit of, really reinforcing the idea that everybody's crushing it is a tongue-in-cheek title for this podcast. You are crushing it in FinTech, and I commend you for that. And we're benefiting from that. So I thank you for it as well. But Kingswood US, as well as myself personally, are going to make a donation as part of this episode to your wife's charity. And, hope that through our prosperity, we can give back as much as we possibly can to make the world a better place and to help those in need. So we're more than happy to do that. And again, I really appreciate her efforts in such a noble cause.
Well, thank you, Doug, and thank you to the Kingswood companies. That's very generous. I was not expecting that, and we very much appreciate it. And those children and families do as well, too.
So, Matt, I really want to thank you for your time today. This has been enlightening. FinTech clearly is one of those industries that is just going to grow and grow. And you're very well positioned to be a big part of that story on Wall Street, on Main Street, in financial services, in the lexicon. I'm sure that soon enough, an alternative investment will be Altigoed or Altigoed, depending on how you choose to pronounce it. And I really appreciate your time. There's going to be a link to the charity as well on the website, kingswoodus.com, where we post the podcast. And I will make sure to put it in a prominent place so anyone can find it and help out with this wonderful cause. But Mat Dellorso from WealthForge and Altigo, I really appreciate your time. And I look forward to comparing notes with you in the future and maybe getting my my grilling game up to speed.
We'll have to do it together one day, Doug. I'm honored to be a participant on your podcast. I look forward to seeing this podcast crush it on social media as well. So thank you for the donation to Noah's Children, and thank you again for having me.
It's my pleasure. Thanks. Mat Dellorso, everybody.